This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Start Giving acknowledges the traditional custodians of the hundreds of First Nations across this richly diverse continent. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, including to those listening.
Hello and welcome to the Start Giving podcast. I'm Daniel Petre, the founder and chair of Start Giving. Launched in 2013 by Canva CEO Melanie Perkins and her husband Cliff and Cam Adams, Canva is an online design and visual communications platform. With a mission to empower everyone in the world to design anything and publish anywhere, Canva has over 130 million monthly active users in over 190 countries. Cliff and Mel each own an 18% stake in Canva, valued at billions of dollars, and they've pledged to transfer more than 80% of their wealth to the Canva Foundation for charitable causes. Welcome, Cliff. So look, two normal but very smart humans out of Western Australia who are now leaders of a massive global tech company. When did the idea of philanthropy or helping others become something in your life?
From the earliest days of traveling, when Mel and I were at university, even before we sort of saved up all our pennies from our crappy part-time jobs and traveled to cheap places, which inevitably had a lot of poverty. Like we went to India for 3 months as our first big trip together, and it was quite confronting to see the level of inequality in the world, which we really didn't have that much awareness of. Like maybe you go on a few trips when you're a kid to Bali or whatever and you see it a little bit, but backpacking around India really brought home the inequality in the world, and that really planted the seed. And even back then when we had no money, we would just try to help people out, like haphazardly, like buy someone a meal or bought a bunch of kids some clothes, etc., etc. And that then just became part of like our DNA. Like if there's people in need and you have excess, of course you're going to help. Like it wasn't really like an aha moment. It just is like a common sense thing and like a humanity thing. And so when we started to, like Canva started to do well as the company, we'd done a bunch of things. Like we were already doing some giving through Canva and the giving, not the giving pledge, the 1% pledge. But as our paper wealth started to grow, we started to think a lot more about, hey, we need to do something about this kind of now. Like we can't be seen to be billionaires in the paper, yada, yada, and not be doing something proactively. And so like the weight of the resources we had at our disposal really prompted us to take that action. And even though it was all tied up in paper money, we said, hey, we actually need to start liquidating some of this stuff because the title of a billionaire doesn't sit well with us, and we need to start distributing that. And that led us to sort of experimenting with I'm giving you a very long answer for the first question.
That's good though. No, it's a good answer.
Started experimenting with a huge bunch of stuff. Essentially, like just like starting a company, you need to start. And that act of starting and taking that first step is probably the hardest thing. Like quitting your job and doing the thing, that's very difficult. But you learn so much in the process. And we invested in a bunch of different projects. We made a bunch of mistakes. Some were good, some were maybe not so effective. And we started to really hone in what was important to us. And a key part of what prompted that was the 1% pledge. And so for anyone, I think this applies to individuals, but especially to companies, just allocating 1% of your net resources or your income on an annual basis really is a good forcing function. Like 1% is not much, but just having that forcing function of what are we going to do with this 1% forced us to start taking those first steps. And then from those first steps, we learned, evolved, and sort of continued on that journey.
Look, it's been an amazing journey and amazing insights for you guys to start so early. I want to sort of pick up on a couple of things there. One is, as you've already kind of said, you've pretty much, at least publicly, quickly decided to allocate more than 80% of your paper wealth, your Canva wealth, to charitable causes. And as we all know, that's in billions of dollars. And you made that commitment much, much earlier than most people would do in your situation where you're building a company. So firstly, what you're doing is simply amazing. As I've said to you privately a number of times, it's truly inspiring. But how did you come to that decision so early to publicly state that you're allocating so much of that wealth to philanthropy?
Yeah, I think it's actually about 95%. We earn about, I think, like I don't know how the dilutions worked out over the last year with hiring people. You slowly get diluted when you own a decent sized company and hire a lot of people. But we owned about 31% of Canva, and we're giving away 30% of Canva. So like we're keeping 1% pretty much. That's just to sort of like, who knows what's going to happen. Like we may need to help some other. So I don't know what we need to do there, but we're keeping 1%. But we'll give that away as well because we don't want to go to the death and leave lots of money for our kids or anything like that. So I don't know. It wasn't like a decision for us. It was a decision to start like evoking the mechanics of how we need to transfer that and set it up logistically, because that's quite it's quite a process. It's going to be the largest sort of philanthropic transfer in Australia's history. So we need to get, I won't bore you with the details, but private taxation rulings, et cetera, et cetera. But the actual act of deciding, it was just obvious because it was like, how much money do you need, right? Like we're very fortunate. We have a nice house. We have 2 cars. We got everything we need and we can travel. So it's like, and not fancy cars. We got a Corolla and my car, which is a Land Cruiser for camping. But yeah, we've got all we need and we've got a bit of excess. And how much? What are you going to do with $1 billion? Seriously, it's crazy.
No, like look, it's refreshing, and I 100% agree with all your comments. It's just surprising to me how different it is. You know, if you go back to the old rich white guy, cohort, their argument, and as I've had for 30 years with many, is that they can't afford to focus on anything while they've got their day job. And I think the way you've approached it, you've come from a basic humanity, which is, well, of course, if we can help, we should help. Moving gears aside, how do you guys think about time allocation between, work, family, and philanthropy, given you're still building your family and you're building Canva still to what it can be, which is, probably a lot bigger than it is today. So how do you guys think about sort of time allocation between all these parts of your life?
That's a tough one. And there are a few ways of looking at it. There's the Warren Buffett method, where he focuses 100% of his time on building wealth and has then essentially distributed all that through the Gates Foundation, which is a fantastic foundation. We didn't want to do that. We feel some of the best sort of skills we have to offer beyond, like, as well as the money, is our intellectual capacity. And we don't really think we're adding tons of value right now because we're just in a massive learning mode. So we're working with really, really good partners. And we get deeply involved in these projects. Give Directly is our largest partner. Then we're working with Prevail on a structured pedagogy and education project. But we essentially, you need good partners, right? So you're not having to dive in and problem solve every tiny nuanced thing in whatever project you're running. So good partners are key. And then just allocating time. So Mel and I both have Wednesday mornings as our kind of philanthropic carve out. And so if there's going to be any, like we had some meetings today, I got an update from the structured pedagogy project. But Wednesday mornings is the morning where we'll take those meetings, we'll do the thinking and we'll sort of time box it.
You mentioned, I think it might be interesting for people who are listening to the podcast to talk a bit about your sort of amazing partnership or commitment to Give Directly, which I think you guys have allocated over $30 million to already to help the poorest of people in Malawi. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that project and sort of the impact it's having?
It's an amazing project. It's an amazing team. Essentially, the premise is you have a lot of poor people in the world, and the world's poorest people, how can you help them, right? And there's a lot of probably great projects that give them goats or blankets or mosquito nets or whatever, and that sort of like implying that you know what they need. But Give Directly is just about giving these folks money. And the argument that everyone comes back with straight away is, oh, what if they're going to spend it on drugs and alcohol? And the reality is that pretty much doesn't happen. Like, I'm sure there's some edge cases, but ultimately the data says, and like the programs show, that doesn't happen. We started our first big give in Malawi last year with $10 million, and then have scaled that up to $20 million this year. And we plan to continue to scale that. And the goal is it's to figure out how to solve global poverty. There's been a lot of money, there's been more money that's gone into global poverty that could actually solve it. Like with the amount of money invested, you could have solved global poverty, but it hasn't happened because the money transfer has been very inefficient. So we want to figure out an efficient way where we can get firstly a small village out of poverty, then a district out of poverty, then hopefully a whole country out of poverty. And it's a crazy big goal, but then if you can achieve that at a small level, it can be scaled broader, and then hopefully then you can scale it to other countries. And I know it sounds a bit batshit crazy, but and we may never achieve it, but it's what we're wanting to do. And by giving people money, it allows them to invest in things like invest in making a small business, buying a bicycle or a motorbike. We give people, I think it's $550 for the year. And the first program gave them that on a monthly basis. However, we're editing the program for the second larger cohort to be $50 up front. And that $50 up front allows them to take care of all their immediate needs, right? They may have debts. They may have to buy some grain. They may need food. They may have medical bills. They may have some urgent school fees, right? And that allows them to take care of that. And also then we give them a month or two to think about how they're going to invest their $500. So rather than it being like month on month, they actually are investing in much larger things like, hey, I can lease a plot of land. I can buy crops and fertilizer. I can buy a motorbike. I can invest in a lot of it's like medical stuff and education, or a lot of it's like infrastructure for their houses. They don't have to every year replace their straw roofs, etc., etc. So it really empowers them to make their own decisions. And then that probably the best thing is that money starts circulating around the villages, right? So when you have a village that all has an influx of money, they then start buying from the local store in the village, the grain provider, like they're employing people to put that roof on their house, or et cetera, et cetera. And so it uplifts and that money starts circulating around the community. What we're also thinking about is how we can complement the cash transfers with things like educational interventions. So how can we uplift alongside the cash, the educational quality in these certain areas? And then what infrastructure do they need? Do they have access to clean drinking water? Because some of those collective larger infrastructure projects that generally these places aren't good at collectivizing all their money and like, hey, let's all chip in and build a well. Like that just doesn't organically happen. So we're thinking about a few periphery things.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic that work. In our foundation, we've probably started the other way. We've started with doing water bores in villages to stop people having to go to the riverbanks and get dirty water and all the complications. But and it is this interesting trade-off between how do you put infrastructure things in that don't normally come out of organic people coming together versus how do you give agency to the individual. So look, it's extraordinary.
And there's always like a bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like you can't do anything if you're not healthy. If you don't have clean drinking water, you're going to have dysentery. You're going to be very unhealthy. So it's like you need the very, very basics, which is like base health, because if you don't have that base health, you can give people money and then all their money will be spent on solving the symptoms of those problems that are caused by lack of malnourishment and lack of clean drinking water.
Yeah, we started the drinking water, then we're moving on to sort of GM grain for drought tolerance and stuff. But to sort of bring it back to the sort of start giving, sort of what we're trying to focus on, you're the sort of poster child in some sense. What you and Mel are doing is we want founders to start thinking about giving now and not waiting until they're older, because as you pointed out, suffering doesn't wait until a funding round or an exit. And there are ways that you can start giving early if you want to, but just starting. And as I think, hopefully you seem to be getting this sort of joy out of the help you're providing to people. Part of it's clearly coming from a basic humanity you guys have got, that you just feel you should do the right thing. But I also sense there's a sort of a joy you're getting in helping others. With your scale of problem, which is $1 billion of problem, billions of dollars of problem, how do you think about doing that effectively at scale? I mean, I know you used a very good example of a startup and an MVP, and you're building the MVP. How do you think about this sort of 5 years out? What does it look like, do you think, in the case of the work you're doing?
I think that's why we've picked one or two projects, particularly the Give Directly project we're really doubling down on. Like we started off, the best thing everyone can do to start is just commit 1%. It's like not much. Like, are you wealthy enough to give up 1% to help the world's poorest people in some way, shape or form? And I think for those that live in Australia or the US, I think and are privileged, especially working in sort of like the knowledge worker space, I think most of us are that privileged, right? And the act of committing 1% then forces you to think through how you're going to distribute that 1%. And the act of thinking through how you're going to distribute that 1% starts to like get you to ask yourself questions. What projects do I care about? Is it education? Is it the environment? Is it poverty? Like that commitment of 1% forces you to start that journey. And then from starting that journey, you realize, and you'll make some mistakes, and there'll be some projects that really resonate, there'll be some that don't. And then you'll be like, hey, I'm on the path now. And then if you choose, you can double down on things. You're like, oh wow, I feel really proud of the impact of I'm having with my $100 or $1,000 or whatever. Do I think I can double down on that? Do my resources allow me to invest more? And is that a good use? Am I better off spending an extra $1,000 a year on fancy drinks at a bar, or can I bring two people like literally out of poverty and change their life? Like I'd rather probably spend $100 or $1,000 on helping people, and that's more satisfying than yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea of starting early, and we have a whole bunch of resources to help founders think about how they can liquidate small parcels of equity, and so they can start that journey so very early and start it with small amounts.
Yeah, I mean it's easy to sell shares. Like I mean, you're everyone's always selling shares and doing liquidity events at some point, and it's more difficult to say, oh, I'm going to liquidate $50 million and buy a Ferrari and like a super yacht and blah blah blah. But we're like, oh, we're liquidating $50 or $100 million for the next couple of years to invest directly in philanthropy. You can see where this money is flowing into our philanthropic organizations. You're not going to get much pushback from investors if that money's going to make the world a better place. But if you're going to buy stupid shit that's going to make you look like a weirdo to all your staff and investors, then it might get some more pushback and or at least raise a few eyebrows.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is easy to get share sold, for good causes. Often when I've talked to wealthy people, young and old, it tends to be a top-down discussion, which is, oh, well, I've got, $1 billion, 500 million, 300 million, 10 billion, I'll give away 5% or 10%. And you guys seem to have started the other way around, which is how much do we need to live the life we want to lead and we have a right to lead? And then with, I think in your case, a huge dose of humanity in that and sort of humbleness in that, and the rest can get given away. Can you talk me through how, if you were talking to an old rich white guy, as I have, who's starting the top down sort of methodology and you're the bottom up, how would you try and convince them to reverse their flow?
So we didn't grow up with much money, right? Like my mum was a teacher, my dad was a boilermaker, but then we went into work safe, which is like the safety inspection stuff. So I mean, we had a house and we grew up well, but we didn't have much. We weren't like rich by any stretch. But we had an awesome upbringing, riding our bikes around and doing cool shit, going camping. I tell you what, I went on a fishing trip last week, right? And we went spearfishing and fishing, and we just like took the boats out every day. We're lucky we had boats, like, but that was the best trip ever. Like that was so much better than going to like 5-star hotels and restaurants. We were staying in like, it was actually a dilapidated shack, and that was the best. That was the best holiday I've had. It didn't cost much, right? And it's like, what kind of life do you want your kids to live, right? So like a lot of people say, oh, I'm doing this as a family nest egg, right? But you see all these people that are given everything, right? It's no satisfaction. Like I don't want to be given everything. Like I think that causes like mental health issues when you essentially grow up knowing you don't need to earn your way in life, and you grow up not feeling proud of your accomplishments because you've got this huge pool of cash that you know is going to be there. Like that will mess you up. Like, and I think it's unfair to take away the personal satisfaction from your kids of actually making it themselves. Because I don't know, I'm happy we did it ourselves.
I sort of echo all your comments, and actually the research actually shows that generally speaking, intergenerational wealth doesn't help the children or the children's children. You actually do corrupt their lives. You think you might be doing the right thing and you're actually not. You take away their agency, as you've talked about, and you they don't turn into good humans, sadly. Their morals and values.
I don't like hanging out with super rich people that grew up rich. I like all my friends like grew up just like us, and they're the fun people. So just get it, not the people that.
I agree with you. I've got this Venn diagram of rich people overlapping with good humans, and there's a very, very, very small sliver of overlap that I found from my 64 years on the planet. Look, Cliff, this has been fantastic, and you've been, I think your humanity that you and Mel are showing, and the way you've just sort of focused on really doing something meaningful at scale too is truly inspiring. And I am sure there'll be hundreds of founders who'll listen to this and feel inspired to do something meaningful, even if they're starting at their pledge 1%, or they're moving a little bit of equity into a PAF or something, just starting small, as you said, and then on things they care about, as you've said, and building that. So I'd just like to close out with maybe just a rehash or summary of if you were talking to a young founder now who's starting their journey as you and Mel and Cam did so many years ago, and they haven't had the exposure maybe that you had on your India trips. How would you get them to sort of just focus on trying to do something early?
Well, firstly, if you haven't traveled, just go travel. Go to India. Like, India is the most amazing country in the world. Yeah, if you just lived in your bubble your whole life, get out of your bubble. That's just like, that's not even to do with philanthropy. That's just like, fucking live kind of thing. And then if you want to start on the philanthropy, I think the 1% thing is the best way to do it. It's like a small sum of money, and it's
Just start. Just start doing something.
You on that journey. So yeah.
That's fantastic, Cliff. Great way to finish the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. Again, I think what you guys are doing is inspiring, and it's been a joy and a humbling experience to spend this time with you. Seriously, thanks so much.
Pleasure, man. Take care. Thanks so much. Great work you're doing on this podcast. I love it.
This podcast was written by Catherine Feeney and Daniel Petre. It was produced by AudioCraft. Thank you to our guest today, Cliff Obrecht. Visit startgiving.com for today's episode's show notes and learn more about what we do. You can subscribe to the Start Giving podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or watch this conversation as a vodcast on YouTube.